Hello and welcome. Today, we're going on a bit of an adventure, a journey back in time. We're going to be exploring a lost world of scholarship, all thanks to some incredible research by the Reverend Candavara. We're diving deep into the intellectual heart of ancient Myanmar to see how a tradition kept wisdom alive for pretty much 1,000 years. And really, it all boils down to this one question, doesn't it? How do you do that? It's not just about sticking old books on a shelf and hoping for the best. It's about keeping ideas and teachings fresh and understandable through centuries of change. So you can think of this as a kind of detective story. We're going to follow the clues left behind by generations of incredibly dedicated scholars. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in Upper Myanmar, anywhere between the 11th and 18th centuries. And this place, at this time, was absolutely buzzing with intellectual energy. The monasteries weren't just quiet places for monks to meditate. No, they were these vibrant hubs of learning, analysis, and debate. They were home to some seriously brilliant minds whose work, well, it's been pretty much overlooked until right now. Now, you've got to understand, this wasn't just about monks sitting around and copying old scriptures. Not at all. It was this incredibly dynamic process. These scholars were part of a deep analytical tradition. Their whole goal was to make sure that the original teachings, which were often super complex and written in an ancient language, remained crystal clear and relevant for every single new generation. So, if we're going to crack this historical case, we need to get to grips with our main piece of evidence. And it all comes down to a Pali word that is absolutely central to this entire world, the ṭīkā. I know, it might sound a bit academic, but trust me on this. Understanding this one little word is the key that unlocks everything. So what on earth is a ṭīkā? Well, simply put, it's a sub-commentary. Think of it like this. You've got the original sacred text, right? That's the main event. A commentary is the first layer of explanation on top of that. But what if that explanation itself has some tricky words or really dense ideas? Well, that's where the ṭīkā comes in. It's literally an explainer of an explanation. It's this brilliant tool designed to make sure that not a single drop of meaning was lost over time. And here you can really see this incredible chain of knowledge in action. It all starts with the original teachings, the Pali Canon. Then, the next link in the chain is that first layer of explanation, the commentary, or atthakatha. And finally, you get the ṭīkā, which clarifies the commentary. It's just a brilliant illustration of how understanding was passed down, link by perfect link across the centuries. All right, so now that we know what a ṭīkā is, we need to figure out where and when this whole tradition was flourishing. So let's jump into the timeline and see exactly how this intellectual world grew and changed across the great kingdoms of Upper Myanmar. And what's really clear is that this was not a static tradition. You start in the pagan period, and the main focus is on gathering up texts and just mastering the basics of Pali grammar. But then, by the time of the Phinya and Sagain kingdoms, you see local scholars starting to write their own new works. Then you hit the Ava kingdom, and things get really deep, with a focus on complex philosophy. That's the Abhidhamma period. And later on, during the Kambung dynasty, the tradition just kept on expanding. Each era was literally building on the last. So, we've got the what, the where, and the when. But the next massive question for our investigation is how? How did these scholars manage to analyze these texts with such incredible precision? Well, it wasn't just guesswork. They had a highly structured, almost systematic toolkit for doing their work. And this is it, the six-fold method. This was the gold standard for writing a proper ṭīkā, and it's almost scientific. It's so rigorous. First, you establish the context, the sambandha. Then you analyze individual words, the pada, and all their possible meanings, the atthudhara. Then you look at the grammar, the yojana. And here's the really brilliant bit. You actively raise questions or objections about the text, the khludna. And then you provide the answer, the parihara. This just made sure every single angle was covered, no stone left unturned. Okay, now we get to the real heart of it. We've laid all this groundwork, so what are the actual game-changing contributions from Reverend Candavara's modern research? His work basically sifted through centuries of texts and records to solve some really old mysteries and give us a much, much clearer picture of this intellectual world. So let's get into the big breakthroughs. Okay, this is huge. For the longest time, nobody was quite sure which text actually kicked off this whole unique literary tradition in Upper Myanmar. The vital point here is that by meticulously comparing clues inside the texts themselves, the research proved that this grammar sub-commentary, the Nyasa-padipika ṭīkā, was the very first one. And that is a massive contribution, because for the first time, it gives us a definite starting line for our story. Get ready for a fantastic historical twist. The name Chapatala pops up all over the historical records, and for centuries, everyone just assumed he was this one, single, incredibly busy scholar. But this new research untangled the timeline and revealed something amazing. Chapatala was actually a name used by at least 4 different masters over several hundred years. It's like a detective finally solving a case of mistaken identity that had stumped historians for ages. And this little story, it just brings this whole lost world to life. It's about a 15th century scholar called Aryavamsa. And as he was writing one of his major works, he would read it out loud to his fellow monks. Now, when a visiting monk pointed out a couple of mistakes, Aryavamsa wasn't defensive or annoyed. He was apparently delighted, and he gratefully corrected his work on the spot. This little anecdote uncovered by the research just perfectly shows a culture of collaboration, of humility, and a shared passion for getting things absolutely right. So after digging up all this fascinating history, you have to ask the big question, right? Why does any of this matter today? What can we possibly take away from these ancient palm leaf manuscripts and the scholars who poured their lives into them? Well, this is where it all comes together in a really cool way. On the one hand, you've got the ancient ṭīkā writers carefully explaining texts on palm leaves for a very specific audience of other scholars. And on the other hand, you've got what we're doing right here, boiling down complex research into a short explainer for anyone who's interested. The technology and the audiences couldn't be more different, but the basic goal, it's remarkably similar. And really, that's the ultimate point. Whether it's an 11th century monk in Myanmar or someone creating content today, the fundamental human impulse is exactly the same. It's all about taking complicated, important knowledge and making it accessible. It's about building a bridge of understanding so that the wisdom of the past isn't just lost, but can actually inform and inspire the future. So I'll just leave you with this thought to mull over. Just like those ancient scholars painstakingly preserved and explained what mattered to them, what ideas, what discoveries from our own time are so important that we have a duty to explain them clearly and carefully for the people who will come long, long after we're gone?